This video is about the Gibborim, David's special army of men.
History often remembers King David as this man of psalms, a serene shepherd boy with a harp and a sling. But a kingdom isn't built on music alone, right? It was forged in blood, sweat, and grit by a group of warriors so lethal they completely changed the landscape of the ancient Near East. Today, we're unpacking the reality of David's elite special forces. Let's just dive right in. The myth we always hear is of a gentle shepherd and poet, but the historical reality? It's so much grittier. When David was on the run from King Saul, he wasn't exactly recruiting polished aristocrats. He gathered the distressed, the indebted, the discontented. Basically, he took society's rejects and outcasts and completely transformed them into a highly disciplined, elite Black Ops fighting force. We are plunging right into the deep end of ancient tactical warfare here. So to really understand who these men were, we've got to look at the language. They were known as the Gibborim. In Hebrew, this literally translates to the mighty ones, or heroes. And what's really fascinating is that this word is an intensive form of the Hebrew word for man, which is Geber. The texts from 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles use this specific term to describe guys with extraordinary valor, massive physical stature, and absolute uncompromising mental strength. We're talking about the absolute peak of ancient human performance. Now, the Gibborim weren't just some disorganized mob of strong men. They actually operated within a super strict military hierarchy. There were 37 men in total who made up this complete tactical unit, and they were divided into two main tiers. Tier 2 was the 30. This was the core special operations force, and that number actually fluctuated a bit over time as warriors fell in battle. But at the very top, Tier 1, were the 3. These were the ultimate elite champions, and honestly, their combat feats totally defy logic. Section 2, Legends of the 3 Elite Champions. All right, the first of the 3 is Jashobeam, also known in some texts as Jashobeam. He was the chief of the captains, and his defining number? 800. Yep, that is how many men Jashobeam killed with his spear in a single solitary encounter. From a tactical perspective, military historians suggest Jashobeam essentially mastered the art of the choke point. By holding a narrow pass or a heavily fortified position, he basically neutralized the enemy's massive numbers. In a choke point, technical superiority and sheer physical endurance are literally all that matter. He completely dominated the field. Next up, we have Eleazar. During a massive battle against the Philistines at Pas Dammim, the rest of the Israelite army totally panicked and retreated. But Eleazar? He didn't move an inch. He stood his ground completely alone. And this detail brilliantly illustrates his intensity. The historical record actually states he fought until his hand grew weary and clung to the sword. Think about that. In modern combat sports, this is essentially known as a death grip. It's a total failure of the nervous system from extreme exertion. He reached a physical limit most humans will never, ever experience, and he held that line until the retreat turned into a massive victory. Completing the triad of the 3 is Shammah. Just imagine this scene. A massive Philistine army attacks. And once again, the Israelite soldiers scatter in fear. And where does Shammah make his heroic stand? In a seemingly insignificant field of ripe lentils. He just plants his feet in the dirt, defends that specific little patch of ground all by himself, and absolutely decimates the attackers. He flat out refused to give up even an inch of the king's territory, no matter how small or mundane it might have seemed. Section 3, Benaiah and the 30, Special Operations. So, first up in this wider group is Abishai. He was actually the brother of Joab, David's commander-in-chief. Abishai served as the chief of the 30. His legendary feat? Slaying 300 men with his spear. Now, while the texts do point out he didn't quite reach the mythic top-tier status of the 3, killing 300 enemy combatants absolutely cemented his reputation as a devastating force on the battlefield, and it earned him the command of the Special Ops unit. Then we have Benaiah, the commander of David's personal bodyguard. Honestly, his resume reads like an ancient action movie. But his most famous exploit involves the number 1. On a freezing, snowy day, Benaiah descended down into a dark pit to fight one single lion. Most hunters wait for the predator to come to them, right? But not Benaiah. He took the fight directly into the lion's own territory with literally nowhere to retreat, and he won. And as if taking out a lion in a pit wasn't enough, Benaiah is also recorded going toe-to-toe with a massive Egyptian champion, a giant standing 7.5 feet tall. The Egyptian had this huge spear, and Benaiah, he only had a club. So the really crucial point here is Benaiah's tactical brilliance. He attacked, snatched the spear right out of the giant's hand, and used the enemy's own weapon to defeat him. I mean, that is just next-level combat ingenuity right there.
Section 4. The Water of Bethlehem, a suicide mission.
Okay, picture this. David is hiding out in the cave of Adullam. He's exhausted, and he casually whispers this nostalgic wish for a drink of water from his childhood well back in Bethlehem. The only problem? Bethlehem is currently occupied by a heavily armed Philistine military garrison. But the three overhear him. Without even being ordered, they forcibly break straight through the enemy battle lines, draw the water, and literally fight their way back out. Practically speaking, this was a logistical suicide mission, executed entirely out of sheer, unadulterated loyalty to their king.
So how does David react when they finally hand him the cup? He refuses to drink it. David takes this incredibly hard-won water and pours it out onto the ground as a sacred libation to Yahweh. He argues that this isn't just water anymore. It represents the very blood of the men who put his casual, fleeting desire way above their own survival. This single moment beautifully captures the very core of the Gibborim. It was a brotherhood where absolute loyalty completely outweighed self-preservation.
Section 5. Historical and theological impact. Let's start with the hard history here. Archaeology powerfully corroborates the biblical text. We have the Tel Dan stele from the 9th century BC, which explicitly mentions the House of David, proving his dynasty was a historical reality. Then, excavations at Khirbet Karyafa reveal a heavily fortified Judean city from the exact era of David, showing highly advanced urban planning. Plus, the large stone structure discovered right in the city of Jerusalem confirms massive military engineering. All of this physical evidence proves the existence of David's fortified kingdom, a kingdom that frankly absolutely required a highly trained, elite force exactly like the Gibborim to defend it. Now, let's shift to the theological impact. Biblical scholars draw a super clear line between the physical warfare of the Gibborim and the spiritual warfare paradigm that we find later in the New Testament. Think back to Eleazar, whose hand was physically frozen in a death grip around his sword to secure a victory. Theologians compare this directly to Ephesians chapter 6, where modern believers are instructed to firmly grip the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. The ancient military tactics of the Gibborim perfectly mirror the Christian call to an absolute reliance on divine victory when facing spiritual battles. And you know, this historical roster also provides a complete masterclass in ethical and moral leadership. First, you have absolute loyalty. Men like Uriah the Hittite remained faithful to David even unto death. Second, courage and diversity. The Gibborim weren't just some monolith. They included warriors from various Israelite tribes and even men of Gentile origins, like Ittai. They were united by purpose, not just their background. And finally, servant leadership. These are arguably the most lethal men on the planet, yet they use their immense strength solely to advance their king's agenda. It perfectly illustrates the concept of using power to serve rather than to dominate. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We started with the myth and uncovered the gritty, historic reality of the Gibborim. We saw Shammah stand completely alone in a seemingly insignificant patch of dirt, a literal field of lentils, refusing to yield even a single inch to the enemy. He recognized that if it belonged to his king, it was worth fighting for. So I want to leave you with this question. What field of lentils are you standing your ground for today? What small, seemingly mundane area of your life, your truth, or your principles requires that ancient, uncompromising courage right now? Think about it.
Every like and subscribe is appreciated. And if you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and click on the screen right now.